Ava Taylor never imagined her husband would trade her to a millionaire to pay off his debts. But what began as a year of survival turned into a battle against power, corruption, and lies, one that would uncover family secrets and test her strength. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The deal that changed everything. Ava Taylor stood in front of her bathroom mirror, trying to cover up the dark circles under her eyes. Another night spent worrying about bills, about Darnell, about everything. At 28, she felt much older than her years. The stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter kept growing, and her husband Darnell's promises to make things right were starting to sound hollow. "Baby, you won't believe the good news." Darnell burst into their small apartment. His face lit up with that familiar excitement that usually meant trouble. Ava's heart sank. She'd seen that look before. Right before he lost their savings at the casino. Right before he borrowed money from the wrong people. "What did you do this time, Darnell?" Ava asked, her voice tired. She loved him, had loved him since high school. But sometimes love wasn't enough. "I fixed everything," he said, pulling her into a tight hug. "Remember Victor Marshall, that rich guy I told you about? He's going to help us out with all our debts." Ava pulled away from him, suspicious. Victor Marshall was all Darnell had talked about lately, the millionaire who'd taken an interest in Darnell's get-rich-quick schemes. "What's the catch?" Darnell's smile faltered for just a second. "Well, he wants something in return. He wants you to stay with him. For a year." Now the world seemed to stop spinning. Ava stared at her husband, waiting for him to say he was joking. But the look in his eyes told her everything. "You sold me." The words came out as barely a whisper. "Not sold. No, baby, it's not like that," Darnell rushed to explain. "It's just, he'll pay off all our debts. Everything. The gambling debts, the credit cards, even your student loans. All you have to do is live in his mansion for a year, be his companion." Ava felt sick to her stomach. "Get out. Baby, please. Get out." She grabbed the nearest thing, a flower vase, and threw it at the wall. Darnell ducked, then backed away toward the door. Just think about it, okay? Victor's coming over tomorrow to discuss the details. This could solve all our problems." After Darnell left, Ava collapsed onto their worn couch, her body shaking with sobs. How had her life come to this? She'd always done everything right. Worked hard in school, got her degree, married her high school sweetheart. Now here she was, being traded like property to pay off her husband's debts. The next morning, right at 10 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Ava had barely slept, but she'd made a decision. She opened the door to find a tall, distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his eyes were cold as ice. "Mrs. Taylor," he said smoothly. "I'm Victor Marshall. May I come in?" Ava wanted to slam the door in his face. Instead, she stepped aside. Victor walked in, his eyes taking in the shabby apartment with barely concealed disdain. "Your husband explained our arrangement?" Victor asked, sitting down without waiting. "For an invitation. You mean how he tried to sell me to you?" Ava's voice was sharp. Victor's lip curled slightly. "I prefer to think of it as a mutually beneficial arrangement. I'll pay off all your debts, which by my calculation amount to just over $500,000. In return, you'll live in my home for 1 year, accompanying me to social events and business functions." "And what else?" Ava demanded. "Nothing you're not comfortable with," Victor said smoothly. "I'm not a monster, Mrs. Taylor. I'm offering you a way out of this situation." He gestured at the apartment. Ava felt tears threatening to fall, but held them back. She wouldn't cry in front of this man. "And if I say no, then the debt collectors will come, as they always do. Your husband owes money to some very dangerous people, but the choice is entirely yours." Ava walked to the window, looking out at the city she'd grown up in. She thought about her mother, who'd raised her alone, always telling her to be strong, to never let anyone own her. But what choice did she really have? "If I agree," she said slowly, "I have conditions." Victor raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "You're hardly in a position to make demands, Mrs. Taylor." Ava turned to face him, her chin raised. "You may be buying my time, Mr. Marshall, but you don't own me. I won't be your slave or your toy. I'll attend your events and play my part, but I keep my dignity." For a long moment, Victor just looked at her. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "You're nothing like what I expected, Mrs. Taylor." "Very well. Name your conditions." "I want my own room, my own space. And I want it in writing that after 1 year, all debts are cleared and I'm free to go." Victor stood up, straightening his jacket. "Done. Pack your things. My driver will pick you up tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. He walked to the door, then paused. "Oh, and Mrs. Taylor, we'll need to do something about your wardrobe. Can't have you showing up at the governor's ball in department store clothes." After he left, Ava sat alone in her apartment, wondering if she'd just made a deal with the devil. When Darnell came home that night, she didn't say a word to him. She just packed her things, carefully placing her mother's old photo album in her suitcase. The next morning, a sleek black car pulled up outside her building. The driver, an older man named James, helped her with her bags. As the car pulled away, Ava watched her old life disappear in the rearview mirror. She didn't know what waited for her at Victor Marshall's mansion, but she made herself a promise. No matter what happened, she wouldn't lose herself. She couldn't stop Darnell from selling her time, but her soul was still her own. A gilded cage, the gates of Victor Marshall's mansion swung open automatically as the car approached. Ava pressed her face against the window, taking in the massive property. Perfect green lawns stretched as far as she could see, dotted with marble fountains and carefully trimmed hedges. The mansion itself looked like something out of a movie. All white stone and tall windows. "Welcome to your new home, Mrs. Taylor," James said kindly as he opened the car door for her. The old driver's eyes were sympathetic, making Ava wonder how much he knew about her situation. Victor was waiting at the front door, dressed casually in what probably cost more than her old apartment's monthly rent. "I trust the drive was comfortable?" he asked, not really expecting an answer. "Maria will show you to your room." A short, middle-aged woman in a uniform appeared, gesturing for Ava to follow her. As they climbed the grand staircase, Ava couldn't help but notice all the paintings on the walls. Expensive-looking ones, but cold somehow, like everything else in this place. "Here is your room, Mrs. Taylor," Maria said, opening a door on the second floor. Ava stepped inside and caught her breath. The room was bigger than her entire apartment, with a huge four-poster bed and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. "Mr. Marshall wants you ready for dinner at 7, Maria added. "The closet has been stocked with appropriate clothing. Ring the bell if you need anything." She left, closing the door quietly behind her. Ava walked to the massive walk-in closet and opened it. Inside were rows and rows of designer clothes, all in her size. Shoes, bags, jewelry, everything a woman could want. Everything except freedom. She spent the next few hours unpacking her few belongings, placing her mother's photo album on the bedside table. At 6:30, she chose a simple black dress from the closet and tried to make herself presentable for dinner. The dining room was enormous, with a table that could seat 20 people. Tonight, though, there were only 2 place settings, one at the head of the table and one to the right. "Ah, perfect timing," Victor said as she entered. He pulled out her chair for her, ever the gentleman. "I hope you're hungry. My chef, Antonio, trained in Paris. The food was amazing, but Ava could barely taste it." Victor spent most of the meal on his phone, occasionally barking orders to someone about stock prices and market shares. Finally, he set the phone down and really looked at her. "We need to discuss expectations," he said. "Tomorrow night, we're attending a charity gala at the art museum. You'll find an appropriate gown in your closet. The hair and makeup team will arrive at 5. "I know how to do my own hair and makeup," Ava said quietly. Victor's laugh was cold. "My dear, you're not in your old world anymore. Everything about you reflects on me now. You'll need to learn how to walk, talk, and behave in my circle." Ava put down her fork. "I thought I was just supposed to be your companion, not your puppet." "You agreed to play a part," Victor reminded her. "Unless you'd prefer I call your husband's creditors." The threat hung in the air between them. Ava pushed her chair back and stood up. "If you'll excuse me, I'm tired." Back in her room, Ava let the tears fall. She'd promised herself she wouldn't cry, but everything about this place, about this situation, made her feel small and powerless. Soft knock at the door made her quickly wipe her eyes. It was Maria carrying a cup of tea. "I thought you might need this," the housekeeper said kindly. "The first night is always the hardest." "The first night?" Ava asked. "You mean there have been others?" Maria's face closed off immediately. "I shouldn't say more, but remember, everything in this house has ears. Be careful what you say, even when you think you're alone." The next morning, Ava woke up to find a schedule had been slipped under her door. Every hour of her day was planned out. 9 a.m., breakfast with Victor, 10 a.m., etiquette lessons, 12 p.m., lunch, 2 p.m., wardrobe fitting, 5 p.m., hair and makeup, 7 p.m., depart for gala. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, but got dressed anyway. The etiquette teacher turned out to be a stern woman named Mrs. Powell, who spent 2 hours criticizing everything from Ava's posture to the way she held her teacup. "Really, Mrs. Taylor, how do you expect to pass in society if you can't even properly use a fish fork?" Mrs. Powell sighed dramatically. "Maybe because I've spent my life worrying about real problems instead of which fork to use," Ava snapped back. The afternoon wasn't much better. The wardrobe consultant, a rail-thin woman named Simone, kept making little disappointed noises as she took Ava's measurements. "We'll have to take everything in," she muttered. "Mr. Marshall's companions are usually more petite." By the time the hair and makeup team arrived, Ava was exhausted. They spent hours working on her, talking about her like she wasn't even there. When they finally finished and she looked in the mirror, Ava barely recognized herself. Her hair was swept up elegantly, her makeup perfect, and the deep blue gown they'd chosen made her look like a princess. "Much better," Victor said when she came downstairs. He was wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than a car. "Now remember, you're an old friend from college who's staying with me while going through a divorce. Keep conversation light, laugh at people's jokes, and for God's sake, don't mention where you really came from." The gala was like nothing Ava had ever experienced. The museum had been transformed into a glittering wonderland, with champagne flowing freely and waiters carrying trays of tiny food that probably cost hundreds of dollars per bite. Victor kept his hand on her lower back, steering her from group to group. She smiled and nodded and played her part, but inside she felt like she was suffocating. These people, with their fake laughs and sharp eyes, seemed to be waiting for her to make a mistake. "And what did you say your family does?" the woman in diamonds asked, her smile not reaching her eyes. Before Ava could answer, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Well, well, if it isn't Victor Marshall and his latest acquisition." Ava turned to find herself face to face with Regina Burke, the woman who'd been all over the society pages last year after her very public divorce from Victor. The room suddenly felt very quiet and very cold. Secrets and lies. Regina Burke's red lips curved into a predatory smile as she looked Ava up and down. My, Victor, your taste has certainly changed." She took a sip of champagne, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Tell me, dear, how much did he offer you?" Ava felt Victor's hand tighten on her back. The other party guests pretended not to listen, but their eyes were fixed on the drama unfolding before them. "Regina," Victor said coldly, "I didn't expect to see you here. Wasn't your invitation revoked after that unfortunate scene at the Christmas gala?" Regina's perfect smile faltered for just a second. "Oh, darling, you know the museum board can't resist my donations. Speaking of money," she turned back to Ava. "A word of advice, get everything in writing. Victor's promises tend to disappear faster than his wives. That's enough." Victor's voice was sharp. "Ava, let's get some air." But Ava stood her ground. She'd dealt with mean girls in high school, and Regina Burke was just a grown-up version of the same thing. "Actually, Mrs. Burke, Victor and I were just discussing the Children's Hospital fundraiser. Are you involved with any charities, or do you just attend the parties?" Regina's face turned red. Everyone knew she'd been kicked off 3 charity boards for misusing funds. Without another word, she turned and stalked away, nearly knocking over a waiter in her hurry to escape. "Impressive," Victor murmured in Ava's ear, "but dangerous. Regina Burke is not someone you want as an enemy." "I'm not afraid of her," Ava replied. But later that night, back in her room, she wondered if she should be. After all, Regina had been where she was now, living in Victor's mansion, playing by his rules. What had happened to make her so bitter? The next morning, Ava woke up to find her phone buzzing with text messages. Someone had taken her picture at the gala, and now it was all over the society blogs. Victor Marshall's mystery woman, the headlines read, banking billionaire's new love interest. She was reading the articles when Maria came in with her breakfast tray. The housekeeper took one look at Ava's phone and sighed. Best not to read those things, Mrs. Taylor. They'll only upset you. Maria, Ava said suddenly, you were here when Regina lived in this house, weren't you? What happened between her and Victor? Maria busied herself arranging the breakfast dishes. It's not my place to talk about such things. Please, Ava said. I need to know what I'm dealing with. The housekeeper glanced at the door, then spoke quietly. Mrs. Burke was like you once. Young, beautiful, from a different world than Mr. Marshall's. He married her after 6 months, but she changed, or maybe the house changed her. She became obsessed with money, with status, started spending more than even Mr. Marshall could tolerate. What happened? She tried to sell stories about him to the tabloids, private things, family secrets. Mr. Marshall divorced her immediately, cut her off completely. She's been trying to claw her way back into society ever since. Before Ava could ask more questions, Victor appeared in the doorway. I need you ready in an hour, he announced. We're having lunch with some important business associates. The next few weeks fell into a routine. Ava attended parties and charity events on Victor's arm, learned to navigate the treacherous waters of high society, and slowly began to understand the power dynamics at play in this world. But she never felt at home in the mansion. At night, she would often wander the halls, unable to sleep. That's how she discovered Victor's secret study on the 3rd floor. She hadn't meant to snoop, but the door was open one night and she heard voices. Victor was arguing with someone on the phone. The deal goes through next week, he was saying. Of course, I'm sure Burke Industries won't know what hit them until it's too late. Yes, Regina's company. Consider it payback for her indiscretion. At the gala, Ava backed away quietly, her heart pounding. Victor wasn't just planning to hurt Regina financially, he was going to destroy her completely. The next day, she ran into Regina at a coffee shop near the mansion. The older woman looked tired, the perfectly maintained facade starting to crack. Come to gloat? Regina asked bitterly. No, Ava said. I came to warn you. Victor's planning something to do with your company. Regina's face went pale. Why are you telling me this? Because whatever happened between you and Victor, no one deserves to lose everything. Regina stared at her for a long moment. You really don't know what you're involved in, do you? Victor Marshall doesn't keep women around because he likes their company. He collects people, their secrets, their weaknesses. Then he uses them. What? Do you mean? Why do you think he chose you, a married woman, desperate enough to leave her husband for money? You're perfect for his latest business deal, the sympathetic face of his new charitable foundation. The press will eat it up. The poor girl from the wrong side of the tracks now dedicating her life to helping others. Ava felt sick. You're lying. Am I? Check his calendar for next Thursday. Board meeting at the Marshall Foundation. You're scheduled to give a speech about your journey from poverty. He's been planning this for months. Back at the mansion, Ava went straight to Victor's study. She found the foundation documents right where Regina said they would be. Everything was there. The PR strategy, the planned media coverage, even a draft of the speech she was supposed to give. Her hands shaking, she picked up her phone and dialed a number she'd promised herself she wouldn't call. Darnell, it's me. We need to talk. But when her husband's phone went straight to voicemail, she decided to check his apartment. The drive across town to her old neighborhood felt like traveling between different worlds. She knocked on the apartment door, but there was no answer. Their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, poked her head out. If you're looking for Darnell, she said, he left 2 weeks ago, packed up everything in the middle of the night. But here's the strange thing, a fancy car picked him up. One of those big black ones like rich people have. Ava's blood ran cold. She pulled out her phone and quickly searched for recent payments from Victor's accounts. There it was, a transfer of $2 million to an offshore account, dated the day after she moved into the mansion. Victor hadn't just paid off their debts. He'd paid Darnell to disappear. Betrayals and alliances. Ava sat in her car outside the apartment building staring at her phone. $2 million. That's what her husband thought she was worth. She wasn't just a way to pay off debts. She was a product Darnell had sold to the highest bidder. When she got back to the mansion, Victor was waiting in the foyer. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "We have the foundation photo shoot in an hour." "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Ava's voice was surprisingly calm. "About the foundation? About Darnell?" Victor's face didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Come to my study. We shouldn't have this conversation here." Once inside the study, Victor poured himself a drink. "What exactly do you think you've discovered?" "You paid my husband to disappear. You've been planning this whole foundation thing for months. I wasn't some desperate woman you decided to help. I was a casting call for your latest business scheme." "Sit down, Ava." Victor's voice was tired. "Yes, I paid Darnell to leave the country. I did it to protect you. Do you really think he would have stayed away otherwise? He would have kept coming back asking for more money, causing scenes. I did you a favor." "A favor?" Ava laughed bitterly. "You've been manipulating everything from the start. Regina told me." "Regina?" Victor slammed his glass down. "You've been talking to Regina after I specifically warned you about her. She was telling the truth, wasn't she? About how you collect people, use them." Victor walked to the window, his back to her. "You don't understand how this world works, Ava. Everything is a transaction. Everyone uses everyone else. The only difference is I'm honest about it." "Honest?" Ava stood up, anger making her brave. "You were going to parade me around like some charity case, use my story to make yourself look good." "The foundation is real," Victor said quietly. "The money will help people. Your story, a woman rising above her circumstances, would inspire others. Is that really so terrible? My story is about a woman whose husband sold her to pay his gambling debts. About a man who thought he could buy and sell people like stocks. That's the story I should tell at your fancy foundation launch." Victor turned to face her, his expression dangerous. "Be very careful, Ava. You signed a contract. 1 year of your life belongs to me." "No," Ava said firmly. "You bought my time, not my soul, and I won't be your puppet anymore." She turned to leave, but Victor grabbed her arm. "You're not going anywhere. We have a deal. Let go of me." Ava pulled away just as Maria appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Marshall," the housekeeper said urgently. "Mr. Chen is here for the meeting. He's waiting in the conference room." Victor released Ava's arm. "We'll finish this discussion later. Go to your room and calm down. Maria, make sure Mrs. Taylor stays there." But as soon as Victor left for his meeting, Ava had an idea. She turned to Maria. "I need your help." "Mrs. Taylor, I can't." "Please, Maria. You've seen this happen before, haven't you? With Regina, with others. Help me stop it from happening again." Maria hesitated, then nodded slowly. "The security office. There are files there, recordings. Mr. Marshall keeps everything." While Victor was busy with his meeting, Ava snuck down to the security office. The guard was on his dinner break, just as Maria had promised he would be. Using the code Maria had given her, Ava slipped inside. The files were exactly where Maria said they would be. Videos, photos, documents, evidence of years of manipulation and schemes. Not just Regina and Ava, but dozens of women. Each one carefully chosen, each one used for a different business deal or public relations stunt. Ava's hands shook as she copied the files onto her phone. She had just finished when she heard footsteps in the hallway. "The security system flagged an unauthorized entry," a man's voice said. "Victor's head of security." "Check it out," Victor's voice replied, "and call the police if necessary." "No one steals from me." Ava's heart pounded. The voices were getting closer. She looked around desperately for another way out. The window was too small. The door was the only exit. She was trapped. Suddenly, the lights in the hallway went out. She heard confusion, people bumping into things. "The whole system's down," someone called. "Must be a power surge." In the darkness, Ava felt a hand grab hers. "This way," Maria whispered. "Quickly." They ran through the dark hallways, Maria leading her through a maze of service corridors she didn't even know existed. Finally, they emerged. In the garage. "Take my car," Maria said, pressing keys into Ava's hand. "I'll tell them I lost them, but you have to go now." "Come with me," Ava pleaded. "He'll know you helped me." Maria shook her head. "Someone needs to stay and help the next one. Now go." Ava jumped into Maria's old Honda and sped away from the mansion. In her rearview mirror, she saw the lights coming back on, illuminating Victor's empire like a beacon of false promises. She drove straight to Regina's apartment. The woman who had seemed so intimidating at the gala now answered the door in sweatpants, looking surprised to see Ava. "I have something you need to see," Ava said, holding up her phone. "Evidence. About Victor. About everything." Regina's eyes widened. "Come in, quickly." Inside, Regina poured them both a large glass of wine. "Do you know what you're doing?" she asked. "Victor Marshall isn't just rich, he's powerful. He has friends in high places." "I know," Ava said. "That's why I need your help. You know this world. You know how to fight him." Regina studied her for a long moment. "Why should I help you?" "Because he hurt you too, and because I have proof of what he did to your company. Enough to win back everything you lost." A slow smile spread across Regina's face. Well, maybe Victor finally chose the wrong woman to try to control. They stayed up all night, going through the files, making plans. Regina knew reporters who would love to expose Victor's schemes. She had contacts in the DA's office who had been trying to build a case against him for years. But as the sun rose over the city, Ava's phone rang. It was James, Victor's driver. "Mrs. Taylor," he said urgently. "They've taken Maria, Victor's men. They're saying she stole from him. They're taking her to the police station." Ava's blood ran cold. She looked at Regina. "He's going to frame her for the break-in." Regina was already grabbing her car keys. "I know a good lawyer, but we have to move fast." As they rushed to help, "Maria?" Ava realized she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every person Victor had ever used and discarded, and this time she wasn't going to lose. Fighting back. The police station was crowded when Ava and Regina arrived. They found Maria sitting on a hard plastic chair, her hands cuffed in front of her. She looked small and scared, nothing like the confident housekeeper who had helped Ava. "Escape. Don't say anything," Regina commanded, sweeping into the station like she owned it. "My lawyer is on his way." Right behind them came Victor, looking perfectly put together despite the early hour. His eyes narrowed when he saw Ava. "Well, isn't this touching? The thief coming to help her accomplice." "The only thief here is you," Ava shot back. "Stealing people's lives, their dignity. Mrs. Taylor." A smooth voice interrupted them. A tall man in an expensive suit approached, holding out his hand. "I'm David Chen, Regina called me." Victor's face darkened. David Chen was the best defense lawyer in the city, and Victor's former attorney. The two men stared at each other, years of history crackling between them. "David," Victor said coldly, "I didn't expect to see you involved in a simple theft case." "Simple?" David raised an eyebrow. "A trusted employee of 15 years suddenly decides to steal from you. Doesn't sound simple to me. In fact, it sounds like the kind of case that might interest the media." Victor pulled David aside, speaking in low, angry tones. Ava took the chance to sit next to Maria. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "This is all my fault." Maria shook her head. "No, Mrs. Taylor. For 15 years I watched him destroy people. It was time someone fought back." 20 minutes later, David returned with a satisfied smile. "The charges have been dropped. Mr. Marshall has decided not to pursue the matter." Victor stormed out without a word, but Ava knew this wasn't over. It was just beginning. Back at Regina's apartment, they gathered around her dining room table, spreading out the files from Victor's security office. "Look at this," Regina said, pointing to a document. "Every woman he's brought into that house in the last 10 years, each one connected to a business deal." "And here," David added, "records of payments, bribes to keep people quiet, money to make problems disappear." Ava stared at the papers, remembering Victor's words. Everything is a transaction. He hadn't just been talking about business. He saw all relationships that way. "We need more," David said. These files prove he's manipulative, but not necessarily criminal. We need... He was interrupted by a knock at the door. Regina checked the security camera and gasped. "It's Darnell!" Ava's heart stopped. Standing in the hallway was her husband, looking nervous but well-dressed in expensive new clothes. "Don't open it," Maria warned. "It's a trap." But Ava was already moving to the door. She needed answers. Darnell looked surprised to see her. "Baby, I've been looking everywhere for you. When I heard you left Victor's place..." Save it," Ava cut him off. "I know about the money, Darnell, the $2 million. That was just business," he said quickly. "Victor offered me a deal, the money and a fresh start if I stayed away. But I couldn't do it, baby. I missed you too much." "He's lying," Regina called from inside. "Victor sent him here to spy on us." Darnell's face changed, became harder. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Ava. Victor owns half this city. You can't fight him." "Watch me," Ava replied, and slammed the door in his face. But Darnell's warning proved true. Over the next few days, their lives became a nightmare. Regina's credit card stopped working. Maria was evicted from her apartment. David's biggest client suddenly dropped him. "He's sending a message," David said grimly. "Back off or else." Then came the photos. Surveillance pictures showing all of them meeting, talking, planning. Along with the photos was a note. "Tomorrow, 8 p.m., my office. Come alone, Ava, or these go to the police." With certain additions that would interest them very much. "You can't go," Regina insisted. "It's not safe." But Ava had made her decision. "I started this. I have to finish it." That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about her mother, who had taught her to stand up for herself, to never let anyone make her feel small. What would she think of all this? The next evening, Ava walked into Victor's office building. The security guards let her pass. They were expecting her. Victor was waiting in his top-floor office, the city lights twinkling behind him like stars. "I have to admit, you surprised me," he said. "Most people break much easier." "I'm not most people." "No, you're not." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's why I chose you. Such spirit, such determination. But you're using it all wrong." "Wrong?" Ava laughed bitterly. "Because I won't let you use me like you used all the others?" "Use you?" Victor stood up, walking around his desk. "I was trying to help you. Yes, I had plans for the foundation. Yes, I paid your worthless husband to disappear. But everything I did was to give you a better life." "A better life?" Ava's voice rose. "You treated me like property. You tried to turn me into one of your perfect society puppets, because that's what it takes to survive in this world," Victor shouted, his cool facade finally cracking. "Do you think I enjoyed watching you struggle to fit in? Watching them judge you, whisper about you? I was trying to protect you." "No," Ava said quietly. "You were trying to control me, just like you control everything and everyone in your life. And that's why you'll always be alone." She turned to leave, but Victor grabbed her arm. "Don't walk. Stay away from me. You signed a contract you got through fraud," a new voice said. David Chen stepped out of the shadows by the door, which makes it null and void. Victor's grip loosened. "What are you doing here?" "Insurance," Ava said, "and getting evidence of your true nature." She held up her phone, which had been recording everything. "You really think a recording will hurt me?" Victor laughed. "I own the media in this town." "Maybe," said another voice. Regina walked in, followed by several serious-looking men in suits. "But you don't own the FBI. Agent Thompson, I believe you heard everything you needed?" Victor's face went pale as he recognized the federal agents. His empire of secrets and lies was finally crumbling. As they led Victor away, Ava felt no joy, only relief. It was finally over. Back in Regina's apartment, Maria was waiting with open champagne. "To freedom," she toasted. "To justice," Regina added. "To starting over," Ava said quietly. But as they celebrated, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over." D. Darnell was still out there with Victor's money and Victor's secrets. And somewhere in the city, other powerful men were watching, waiting to see who would fill the void Victor left behind. Ava stared out at the city lights, knowing this was just the beginning of a new chapter. But this time, She wasn't fighting. Alone. Dangerous games. The morning headlines screamed across every newspaper in the city. Banking billionaire Victor Marshall arrested. Ava stared at the papers spread across Regina's coffee table, still not quite believing it was real. Don't celebrate yet, Regina warned, pouring them both coffee. Victor has friends in high places. He won't go down without a fight. As if on cue, Ava's phone rang. It was David Chen. Turn on the news, he said urgently. Channel 7. They flipped on the TV to see Victor walking out of the police station, looking perfectly composed in an expensive suit. His lawyer stood next to him, reading a statement. These allegations are completely false, the lawyer declared. Mr. Marshall is the victim of a vindictive ex-employee and a woman who tried to extort money from him. We have evidence that Mrs. Ava Taylor, along with Regina Burke, conspired to steal sensitive documents and blackmail Mr. Marshall. He's turning this around on us, Ava whispered in disbelief. Of course he is, Regina said grimly. And that's not all. Look who's standing behind him. The camera panned to show Darnell, looking sharp in a new suit, nodding along with Victor's lawyer's statement. My wife has been through a lot, Darnell told the reporters, his voice full of fake concern. C'est Siwar, she's not well. These stories she's telling about Mr. Marshall are all in her head. I just want her to come home and get the help she needs. Ava felt sick. They were trying to make her look crazy, desperate, unstable. Don't worry, David said. Over the phone. We have the recordings, the documents, which they'll claim we fabricated, Regina cut in. We need something bigger, something they can't spin. A knock at the door made them all freeze. Maria, who had been quiet until now, went to check the security camera. It's James, she said. Victor's driver. They let him in. James looked nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder. I had to warn you, he said. Victor's brother Alexander is taking over the company. He's worse than Victor, if you can believe it, and he's hired private investigators to dig up dirt on all of you. Let them dig, Regina said defiantly. We have nothing to hide. You don't understand, James insisted. These aren't normal PIs, they're dangerous people, and they're not just looking at you. They're looking at your families, your friends, everyone you care about. Ava thought of her mother, living quietly in her small house on the other side of town. We need to warn everyone. There's something else, James added. Before Victor was arrested, he transferred millions of dollars to offshore accounts in Darnell's name. The implications hit Ava like a punch to the gut. Victor hadn't just paid Darnell to disappear, he'd made him a partner in whatever scheme he was planning. We need to split up, David said when they called him with the news. They'll be watching Regina's apartment. Ava, you can stay at my guest house. Maria, I have a friend who runs a bed and breakfast outside the city. But before they could make plans, Regina's security system beeped. Someone had cut the power to the building. The stairs, Regina said quickly. There's a service exit that leads to the parking garage. They grabbed their phones and essential documents, then hurried down the dark stairwell. They were halfway down when they heard footsteps above them. Keep going, Maria whispered. I'll distract them. No. Ava grabbed her arm. We stick together. They made it to the parking garage, but Regina's car had 4 flat tires. James's car was blocked in by a large black SUV. This way, Regina said, leading them to a beat-up service van. Sometimes it pays to make friends with the maintenance staff. She had just pulled out the keys when bright lights suddenly flooded the garage. The black SUV that had blocked James's car was moving toward them, followed by 2 more identical vehicles. Get in, Regina yelled, jumping into the driver's seat. The van started with a roar, and Regina floored it, heading for the exit. The SUVs gave chase through the city streets. Regina drove like a woman possessed, taking sharp turns and back alleys, trying to lose their pursuers. Who are they? Ava asked, holding on as they took another sharp turn. Alexander's people, probably, James said. He uses a private security firm called Black Shield. They're ex-military, very professional, very dangerous. Regina's phone rang through the car's speaker system. Hello, Regina, a smooth male voice said. This is Alexander Marshall. Let's talk about how we can end this situation peacefully. Go to hell, Regina snapped, taking another turn. Always so dramatic, Alexander sighed. I'm trying to help you. Victor may be my brother, but I don't approve of his methods. Work with me instead. I can make all your problems disappear." "Like you made Victor's other problems disappear?" Regina asked. "We know about the women who tried to expose him before, the ones who suddenly changed their stories or disappeared altogether. You know nothing." Alexander's voice hardened. "Last chance. Pull over and we can discuss terms." Instead, Regina accelerated, heading for the bridge. "Hold on!" She swerved suddenly, taking an emergency turnaround that was meant for police vehicles. The SUVs couldn't follow without risking a collision with oncoming traffic. When they were finally sure they weren't being followed, Regina pulled into an abandoned warehouse district. Everyone sat in silence, hearts pounding. "What now?" Maria asked quietly. Ava's phone buzzed with a text. It was from an unknown number, but she recognized the style. It was from one of Victor's previous victims, a woman whose file she'd seen in the stolen documents. The message was simple. "Need to meet. I can help. I know where the real evidence is." "It could be a trap," James warned. "Or it could be our chance to finally bring them all down," Ava replied. Regina looked at her in the rearview mirror. "Your call. We follow your lead." Ava stared at the message for a long moment. Everything in her life had led to this moment. Every betrayal, every hard choice, every lesson learned. She thought of all the women Victor had used and discarded, of Maria's courage, of Regina's determination to reclaim her life. "Tell her we'll meet," Ava decided. "But we do it smart. We do it together." As they made plans, Ava's phone buzzed again. This time it was Darnell. "Baby, please, it's not too late to fix this. Just come home." She deleted the message without responding. The woman she'd been, the one who would have believed Darnell's lies, who would have gone back hoping things would change. That woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who wasn't afraid to fight back. And she was just getting started. Hidden truths. The diner on the outskirts of town was nearly empty when Ava walked in. She'd chosen this place carefully for the meeting, public enough to be safe, quiet enough to talk. Regina and James were parked across the street watching. David had people stationed nearby just in case. The woman who'd contacted her was already there, sitting in a corner booth. She was older than Ava expected, maybe in her 50s, with elegant gray streaks in her dark hair. She stood up when Ava approached. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I'm Eleanor Wright. 10 years ago, I was exactly where you are now." Ava sat down across from her. "You were one of Victor's arrangements." Eleanor's smile was bitter. "The first one, actually. Before Regina, before all the others. And I know where he keeps the real evidence, the things even you haven't seen yet." "Why are you coming forward now?" "Because my daughter just turned 18, Eleanor said quietly, "and last week Alexander Marshall offered her an internship at his company." Ava understood immediately. "He's threatening you through her." Victor and Alexander. They're two sides of the same coin. Victor breaks people with charm and manipulation. Alexander does it with fear and force, but they both serve the same purpose, which is power. Eleanor leaned forward. "The Marshalls aren't just rich, they're kingmakers. They choose who succeeds in this city and who fails. They build people up just to tear them down, and they've been doing it for decades." The waitress came by with coffee. When she left, Eleanor continued in a lower voice. "There's a safe in Victor's lake house, not the one the police know about. There's another property, hidden under a different name. Everything's there. Videos, documents, proof of bribes going back 20 years. Enough to bring down not just the Marshalls, but half the power players in the city." "Why didn't you use this information before?" "Because they had my daughter." Eleanor's hands shook as she lifted her coffee cup. "But now she's legally an adult, and she's starting to ask questions about her trust fund, money Victor gave me to stay quiet. I won't let her get pulled into their world." Ava's phone buzzed. A text from Regina. "Black SUVs just pulled up outside." "We need to go," Ava said, standing up. "Now." But Eleanor grabbed her arm. "Wait, there's something else you need to know about Darnell." "What about him?" "He's been working for them longer than you think, way before your marriage. They choose their players carefully, plan everything years in advance. You were never random, Ava. They chose you." Before Ava could process this, The diner's door opened. Two men in black suits walked in, followed by Alexander Marshall himself. "Ladies," he said smoothly, "mind if I join you?" Eleanor went pale. Ava reached for her phone, but one of the men shook his head slightly. Alexander sat down next to Eleanor, who seemed to shrink into herself. Eleanor, I'm disappointed. After all we've done for Jessica, leave my daughter out of this." Eleanor whispered, "I'm afraid that's not possible anymore." Alexander turned to Ava. "You've caused quite a lot of trouble, Mrs. Taylor, but it's not too late to fix things." "I'm not interested in your offers," Ava said firmly. "No?" Alexander pulled out his phone, showing her a video. It was security footage of her mother's house. A red laser dot appeared on the window, then moved to focus on her mother reading in her favorite chair. "One phone call," Alexander said quietly. "That's all it takes." Ava felt the blood drain from her face. "You wouldn't. Wouldn't I? You've seen the files. You know what we're capable of." He smiled, and in that moment he looked exactly like Victor. "But it doesn't have to be this way. Work with me, help rebuild Victor's foundation. Be the face of redemption and second chances. Everyone loves a good redemption story." The diner. Door opened again. This time it was Darnell who walked in, looking uncomfortable in his expensive new clothes. "Baby," he said, approaching their table, "please listen to them. They can make everything okay again." Ava looked at her husband,